Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. My name is Ryan.
And I'm a raccoon with greedy little hands and super speed.
That's awesome. Hey, I'm Wythe Marschall, creator of the Stillfleet studio over at the game Stillfleet, and we are very, very happy to be producing Blister Critters by Tony Grasso.
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm the creator of Odd Games, creator of Blister Critters, and I am excited to be here.
Yeah, and if you couldn't tell already, we're talking about Blister Critters today. So, fun game coming up for Zine Quest. Quick starts out right now. Highly recommend grabbing it. But to kick it off, I guess let's start with what is Blister Critters, and then we'll come back to that again in a little bit.
Tony?
Blister Critters is a mutant cartoon animal ttrpg. You play as a little critter, no bigger than a foot tall, exploring the post-ecopocalypse. So it's set like 20 years after humans poofed, just kind of vanished from existence. And you run through suburbia with no humans around, fighting off beasts, so larger animals that have also mutated over time under like a supercharged sun. You find other smaller groups in burrows, so smaller groups of animals, and you are just free to set loose into the world full of human stuff. It's the in-game term for weapons and armor and medicine. All of the different equipment and stuff other games would have is just called stuff, and it's all of the human stuff. Coffee mugs and paper clips and bananas are all at your disposal in Blister Critters.
Yeah,
Importantly, to put a period on it, it's all wrapped up in a Saturday morning cartoon. So not only are you a little mutated animal, it's all taking place as though you were on a cartoon. So zany, wacky antics are supposed to ensue.
Love it.
Yeah, and if you've read the Quick Start before, again, if you haven't, definitely go to the is it on the Stillfleet one? I always just search Blister Critters Quick Start on Google, and it takes me to the right link.
It'll pop up, but it's the Stillfleet itch page. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Highly recommend reading it. The way that, and like I said, we'll get to that again, but the way that the cartoony aspect actually melds with the mechanics, and the mechanics fit into this eco-apocalypse thing, absolutely fantastic. So well done. But to start, you guys are not, you're two different things. We have Stillfleet and we have Odd Games. Stillfleet is this big sci-fi book right here, with some other stuff coming out. How did Stillfleet and Odd, which if you look at emu, which I also have right here too, those two things next to each other, they're a little bit kind of opposites. So how did this kind of meeting of the minds come together?
Yeah, I mean, well, Stillfleet is sort of the product of my making games for my friends. I was always the forever GM. I've been GMing since I was 12, and I was writing a lot of my own content, creating vast worlds and eventually game systems, and friends told me to publish them. And when we started doing that, I started working with an artist. He's a good friend of mine named Ethan, but we quickly found we needed more art. So we worked with a few other artists, and a couple have been really great. And honestly, one of the best contacts I made was, I think, just from randomly finding you on ArtStation, Tony, but I'd reached out and hired Tony to do some sci-fi art. And Tony has a really great style that's very graphic. It's different from Ethan's, but it sort of complements. So we sort of liked the idea of having, the secondary style of art throughout the book, especially with sort of monsters. Like Tony was obviously very good and very fast at kind of creating creatures. And so we loved that, just throwing like aliens at him. And so that's how we got in touch. And I think Tony had gotten some familiarity with the system behind Stillfleet, the Grit system, and so pitched me on sort of a game using our system, but totally, from his brain, of this kind of cartoon, surreal Saturday morning eco-apocalyptic universe, which we loved and just felt very much in keeping with our work in terms of sort of the politics of like production and many other things. But that's something that we're really interested in, like in Stillfleet too. There's a lot of stuff in Stillfleet. It's called Architect, but the sort of magic item types, the sort of sci-fi MacGuffins, are a big part of the game. And so I liked the idea that this was a totally different universe, but it's the same rules and it's the same obsession with yeah, maybe humans have screwed some things up. Maybe they've made too much stuff. Maybe some of that stuff is dangerous. But here, it's inverting it and putting emphasis on, all right, so now you're playing as, a squirrel who's come in and found this house full of crap. What do they do with it? So it sort of made sense to me, even though, yeah, it's different. But that was kind of part of the appeal, is that it wasn't like very close to our sci-fi vision. It was a, alt modern kind of setting. And something we weren't going to do, right? So it didn't feel, it's like, you're not competing with me because I'm never going to write this book. I don't have time. And it's such a good idea. Now I'm like, no. You do that. Like, you own the cartoon space, So.
Yeah.
And similarly, I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, I after doing Amu, which you have, and some of the work that I did with Wythe is in the Stillfleet book. But after doing Amu, I was like, oh, I like making these games. Prior, I didn't make a bunch of them. I'd run stuff at home, but not under any specific system, just really cobble together for fun. And then after making Amu, I realized that I liked making the games that I had been doing all this artwork for. And so the months after the Kickstarter wrapped up for Amu specifically, I just made a bunch of small like crap, and some of it's really good and some of it's all right. But it was just a fun time to like experiment and like try new stuff. And in that, Blister Critters came about through, I think, like a warm-up sketch where I drawn like a mouse wearing like a keyboard cap as a helmet. And like much of my work, it's not like design or writing like first. It's, I had a cool idea that looks cool on paper. How can I make a game where I get to do more of this artwork now? And like Wythe said, I had been working with them for a little while, and I enjoyed what I had read through of the Stillfleet system. And so here we are, rambling about Blister Critters.
I feel like that's so Saturday morning cartoon, though. It's just like, yeah, we came up with these cool characters, and like, we're just gonna put them somewhere.
Yeah,
like that's just the most like He-Man Saturday morning cartoon thing ever,
We're just brute forcing it into existence now.
Yeah. Hey, it's a method that's been proven to work. We've already seen it work, so
yeah. It's design the toy first, and then you have to sell the toy. So you're like, crap, we need a whole plot line to hook kids into buying Optimus Prime toys. It doesn't really matter. He's a truck. He's a talking truck. I don't know. Figure it out. Yeah.
I had Lion-O underwear, so
I would say Thundercats,
Yeah, Thundercats was my jam.
So funny.
It's fantastic. And like I said, we're going to talk about the way that that's all pulled in, especially the Saturday morning cartoon bit, which is such a good way to really help players and GMs get to like embrace those kind of principles a little bit better. Prior to that, though, there's another person who's working with you guys on the project. I think much more in the background, but definitely there is Logan Dean. Great designer. Definitely check out all their stuff. Psychers is fantastic. The company is great. How did he also get kind of pulled into this cartooniness that we have going on now?
Yeah, I met Logan this year at Gen Con through our mutual friend Taylor Moore of Fun City Ventures, Worlds Beyond Number, stuff like that. And I think, Taylor knew we were looking for help with turning the Stillfleet studio into a business, since I'm a writer, right? I'm a social scientist and writer, and I know how to write games, and I think I'm pretty good at it. But in terms of running a small business, it's like, oh, wow, that's annoying. That's a lot of numbers and things that aren't creative, really, or they're a different kind of creative. Let me say that. So he put me in touch with Logan, and Logan was kind of giving me a lot of really good free advice. And at some point we decided to work together, and so brought Logan on as our producing consultant for Blister Critters. And there's a number of other projects that we are talking about, extending his involvement to make sure happen and are high quality. But since we know we want to do Blister Critters next, it just made total sense to say, all right, we're going to bring Logan into the team, and the team will be, the Stillfleet studio. It's Tony's game, and Logan's our kind of consultant who's really an expert on all of the other parts, the logistics of running big Kickstarters and fulfilling box sets with lots of pieces. I mean, he's done tons of board games, card games. So we have done books, and my wife and I and the others in the team know a lot about sort of book design. But even like cards was new to us. Last year we did a card deck. It came out really well, but that was our first time making something that wasn't a book. So for this, we know that Tony had this vision for lots of pieces, and we can talk about what goes in the box set. And Tony and I've talked about a lot of versions, like options. Some of which we might do later on, right? Like if this goes well, some might become super stretch goals if we do really, really well. But for now, we have a core set of like what's in the box set, what's a stretch goal, and a lot of that was in conversation with Logan, who's just really, really a great great person, really fun to make games with. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more stuff, but for now, it's all eyes on this box set prize.
Bingo.
Nice.
Yeah, I know Logan just did 1978 with Adam Bassett World Champ,
Oh, yeah.
and that had a
Fun
bunch
game.
of pieces and stuff. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So if he brings that level of, I mean, it's a lot of pieces, and it got together in a beautiful box quick and got to us. So that's what's important, especially with Kickstarter. So it's that's great to have someone that can do that for you.
Yeah, and his whole shtick of like it's the evil company. I mean, that was very much when he and I met. We talked a lot about that because it's like that's the point of Stillfleet, right? So the Stillfleet studio is not just the game Stillfleet, but certainly the premise of, well, I made a company to make games about sort of the evils of capitalism. I mean, that's something that he seems very much in line with. So we were kind of like, cool, let's do it. And Blister Critters, like I said, totally different, but it still has a bit of that vibe. And partly it's through making a box with lots of little pieces and some excess in there to kind of set you in the mood. So I definitely think, he's the right man for the job in that sense.
Fantastic. Yeah, and talking about Blister Critters and stuff too. One of my favorite, I don't know if I can find in the Kickstarters, but like in the initial pitch, like one of my favorite lines was exploring and surviving the post-ecopocalypse, ignoring their own warnings of self-imposed ecological disaster, the humans vanished. And I was just like, that's so great. Like they knew it was coming and said, fuck it, we're just gonna keep going. And then now you get to play in the world after, and that just felt so like deep within this kind of like all this cartoon zaniness, but it's like there's this underlying like this is zany and you have all these weird blistered critters because we live in this like post Wall-E-ish, we fucked up the world, now you're here kind of bit. And that's just such a good fun vibe to feel our own like species existentialism. It feels good, so it's fun.
For me, it's like the embodiment of any cartoon where they cut away to this long droning shot that's like hyper detailed, and it shows this really morbid or kind of gross shot for way too long. It's like, oh, we're having a bunch of fun. There's cartoon stuff popping around, and a weird sound effect just went off. But then it pans over, and some dude's just like deeply depressed, or some horrible stuff's happening, and it cuts back to the fun for a little bit. I really enjoy that about Blister Critters, that it does both. And then depending on who's running it, you can lean into one side or the other, which is written into the rules a bit too, zany and gnarly. So I definitely enjoy like the tension of like the juxtaposition between the two like styles or like vibes.
Yeah, and it reminds me of other shows that do that. But I don't, it's somewhat about intent and foregrounding, backgrounding. But like, if you think of Adventure Time is a little bit similar, where Ooh is, I think, canonically a post-apocalyptic like Earth, right?
It is, yeah.
And it like becomes magical millions of years or however long after sort of we screwed it all up. And that's not really explored much in the show. In Blister Critters, similarly to a degree, that's the setup where there isn't background. You'll never get like a supplement. I don't think this would be like, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, Far From Your Vision, like the Book of Humans or something. Like there are no humans, they're just gone. But I think we do foreground in various ways. We try to remind people that this is kind of as like one philosopher said, the human furniture, right? All of the different stuff is still there that makes the world altered by people, and the sapient animals, those mutant animals that are wandering around in it, know that, so they're living in this, it's sort of ruins. And I think that haunting, I like to think of it as like an elegiac feeling, can be brought through, or you can completely ignore it and do like escapist version. And I think that's kind of a spectrum. And even within one story, there might be scenes that are a little more haunted, and there are scenes that are purely cartoon, Tom and Jerry like craziness. So I think that's something you can play with. I also will say again, Transformers, if you really think about it, it's a show about all these sapient robots whose world like died, and then they come to Earth, hang out with dinosaurs, and eventually meet like a teen boy or something, and they're like, cool, well, let's hang out now. And they're not constantly like, damn, that sucks that everyone we loved died back on Cybertron, but it's there, it's part of the show. So
very cool. So can you kind of explain the base mechanics of Blister Critters?
Yeah. Tony, do you want to do this, or do you want me to do the pitch for the system?
No, by all
overall?
means, you've pitched the grid system far more than I have.
Well, it's a system I came up with over years where your scores are dice, which I think is really fun. There are some other games I found that do this. I think ours does it well. And I've found it hard to go back to systems where your scores aren't dice because it allows for kind of a fine-tuned variability, which I can say more about. But it's a nice like medium crunch. Like you can have big epic moments where you're rolling high, you can have big fails where you roll a 1, but it feels tighter, more responsive to like, okay, I have a D12 that's high, so I'm probably going to be good at something where most people have a D6 in it, right? Like I'm usually going to get a higher roll than someone with a D6. So you have 5 scores. In this game, we have scrap, which in Stillfleet's called combat. So it's the same thing, right? Fighting anytime you're trying to do harm, and that's it. If you're trying to hurt someone, that's scrap. Scurry, which is the rest of your body. In Stillfleet, it's called movement, and that's everything else. You're trying to be sneaky, you're trying to steal something, you're trying to run really fast. It's all scurrying. Instinct is all your animal smarts, your like animal know-how, which in Stillfleet for a human would be called will or willpower. Noggin, which is your human knowledge. So in Stillfleet, that's reason. That's like stuff you have to like go to school to learn, facts, technology. In Blister Critters, noggin is only used for stuff, but there's a lot of stuff in the game. So it sort of represents like in a game I just ran, like a crow had really high noggin and could kind of figure out what human stuff did and put it together. And there's like a really dumb platypus who like had no idea, like had a D4 in that score and was just, I could not, usually need to roll a 6 or higher. So it was just like, yeah, I don't know. It's, that's a thing. I don't care. And then finally you have vibes, which in Stillfleet is charm. And when you're vibing, obviously that's all your social interactions. You're trying to lie to someone or seduce them or just be friendly. So those 5 things, depending on how you distribute your dice, if you have, a high score in scrap, you're going to be good at fighting. If you have a low score in scrap, you probably don't want to be like the fighter who's jumping out and defending everyone, because you're probably going to roll worse than a beast who has, presumably, let's say a D12, like a big feral cat or something. And yeah, when you're rolling against someone, the initiator of the action wins the tie. So you're trying to get sort of, if you're starting the action, you're trying to get the same number or higher. And otherwise, if you're trying to beat like the world, you're trying to get a 6 or higher. And you can always burn your one main resource, grit, to get a +3, a +6, or a +9, which we found is a nice chunk where it kind of hurts, like 3 grit. If you have a starting character like 15, 18 grit, like 3 is going to be noticeable, but it's not so much that you're not going to want to do it when you're like, no, I have to like destroy this roll. And you could still fail on a 1. So even if you burn so much grit, like if you burn 9 grit, you still might roll that 1. So it's a gambling mechanic. The whole system is basically about gambling. How good are you at the epic stuff? How good are you at your normal thing? And when do you want to really push yourself and sort of expend energy versus when you're like, no, I got this, I have a D12. Again, you could still fail, but you roll without grit. So we found it's a really fun way. We've played a lot of fantasy games with this, kind of haunted early modern games. We've played a few genres. Honestly, we had not played any cartoon animal versions until Tony brought it to us. So very fun to translate, and it worked pretty well. I mean, Tony, do you want to say more about like bringing it into your world using those dice?
Yeah, no. So my my approach is far less, I think, academic or insightful. Where I was like, man, a bunch of dice. This is going to be really cool to have on the table. So like in designing like the character sheet, again, a theme throughout kind of how I approach a lot of it is what's going to look and feel the coolest to do. Which I think is why me and Wythe work together really well, is because that's kind of how I approach a lot of it. And then Wythe is like, okay, but what if we make this not just look cool, but also play right? And so I enjoyed having like a large collection of dice to throw through, and then being able to adapt it into the cartoon world was fun, like renaming the stats and then choosing certain rules to make like canon, or not, I guess not canon, but core to them. So like specifically boosting when you roll a maximum on your damage die in Blister Critters, you can burn some grit, 2 grit, and then you can just roll the damage die again for as many times as you can burn the grit. You can keep rolling damage. My players love it. People that I've shown to really enjoy just getting to, it's called exploding. I'm sorry. You explode when you would be able to roll damage again. In Stillfleet, that is a power that you can like elect into or opt to take. So then while I was adapting the Stillfleet or the grit system rules, I kind of had like this big menu of stuff. I'm like, that's cool, boink, that's really awesome, boink. And rather than have them be optional, I was like, this would be cool, and kind of lean into the heavy hitting and the more fast paced and like wackier nature, where I think in a game where you want it to be combat to run for a bit longer, or where you want things to be a little bit more paced, I've leaned into in some of the rules that I've chosen or adapted from the grit system to really just turn the knob like that one extra crank further, to have combat last a couple of rounds, have the hits be really heavy, to have conversational encounters be zany and they can just be wiped away with a silly quip. To have catchphrases where in Blister Critters, as part of creating your character, you develop a catchphrase, and sometimes people will change it over time, or they take a couple episodes till they find it, which is perfect. But once per episode, once per session, you can say your catchphrase, and you can choose any role to roll with advantage. So it's just a cool way to incorporate like a rule with something that is super role play focused, where you don't really get to use it unless you go out of your way to shout, "It's time to like roll out," stuff like that. All right, cool. I like involving or incorporating stuff that goes beyond like the mathematics of the mechanics and trying to tie them into what would be a really fun role play or like vibe setting. I don't know, to mechanicalize a vibe, if I can put it like in a really crass way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you also do something similar with the like your nonsense powers. There's like the option to like only let the power activate if you like say the name of the power out loud, which is like very cartoony, but also helps pull in that RP a little bit. So that it's cool that it comes up more than once and gives people that opportunity over and over again. So that's really cool. It's a great clean system. Like reading through this, it's just you know, I haven't got to play it, but it all makes sense. It's super clean, which is really, really nice. I love the pool between like the grit and the health. And when you're reading it and you're like, oh yeah, like if you still have grit but your health is gone, you're not dead, but here's a terrible condition. If you still have health but your grit is gone, like you're not dead, but here's a terrible condition. And then it's just and it all just feeds back into itself, which is always nice with any mechanics or systems. Like if the mechanic and the way you play that mechanic constantly reinforces how the mechanic works, and anything you add to it just keeps feeling like it makes sense and keeps that feedback loop going, then the system is always going to feel consistent and good. And as I was reading through this and even through like Stillfleet and stuff too, that's what it feels like the system is. It's just everything that keeps getting added to it just continues to make sense and stay nice and clean. So it's great. I really, really enjoy the system a lot.
Yeah, you've really done a good job of reinforcing the vibe of like, this is like a Saturday morning cartoon. Like things are epic. You do fun stuff. Like, yeah, you make quips at your enemies and then knock them out.
Or don't, and then it makes it even funnier.
Yeah.
You mic drop them and then you just get punched. Like, all right, that works too.
Yeah, I mean, we with the core system, like there's a lot of fine tuning that's gone over like 10 years into that, and like I said, it's pretty portable in other genres, and so it was pretty different design brief to like bring it into Blister Critters, but we were pretty confident that it would work. In part, like I'd run Amu using the grid system, so like Tony and I had played a game already where it was like kind of his work, but I was just using my system, and it worked like with very little. Like I didn't really prep a lot. It was like, yeah, I mean, I'll assign stats to like the big fights or whatever. So this was fun, and it was fun to talk to Tony about what he wanted and hear like, okay, you want to feel kind of lower powered, but also zanier, which in a way you think of zaniness could be like higher powered, but we wanted to keep the dice rolling sort of lower. Like with Stillfleet, you can do min-maxing and get these epic, like, okay, I've made a D12 into a D20, which is like a huge deal, et cetera, et cetera. And here we wanted to sort of have more of the narrative powers, which there are a lot of in Stillfleet too. Like, okay, you just flee the scene, you just kill the monster or whatever. If you're successful, if you burn enough grit. But here we wanted to have more sort of very intuitive powers. Like with the animal talents, for example, Tony had all these great ideas for animals, and okay, let's make a power that, you know, in just 2 powers, right? It gives you the sense of being a crow, or 2 powers, it gives you the sense of being, you know, a chinchilla. And then we've had players, yeah, the frog. We've had players come to us and be like, okay, but I want to be a platypus. And it's like, all right, well, we've made like 130 powers or something. But, you know, it's like, go figure out what those are. So, okay, platypods have venom, it turns out. They have like spiked heels. The
spiked heels, yeah. The only mammals with venom, yeah. Yeah,
great. They're just amazing. So, like, that was fun. And then the other one was because they lay eggs. We have the chicken power where you can be a chicken who shoots eggs, like just, you know, gives birth and shoots with such force that you stun an enemy for 1 round. So you burn grit and you just auto stun. You don't have to roll to hit. It doesn't do damage. It just stuns them. And that was something the Platypode character, you know, took on as well. And that just felt very cartoony and fun. And it took, you know, all of 10 seconds. So it's been fun to both adapt the grid system, come up with new stuff with Tony, and then see our players, even in early playtesting, just look at the menu and be like, oh, I got this. Like I know what I want to do. I want to be a 1 foot tall giraffe. So I'm going to pick this and this, you know? And as a GM, you're like, yeah, cool. You're a 1 foot tall giraffe. As long as you're not a big giraffe, that's fine with me, because you have to be small.
Well, that's another thing that I really enjoy, the character creation in general, but especially with the animals and even with the rules and mechanics too. Like, one thing I really like about this is like, it's like rules for anything. Like, you know, people there's this common theme kind of in post-pandemic indie games of like, rules don't matter, do whatever rules you want. But like, I'm like, I agree to a point, but like, try how they're written first, because there's a reason someone thought that those all worked well together, right?
Yeah.
And I really like the way it works in what you have here. And also, it's just, there's not a lot, like, as far as rules to know. It all feels very clean. But character creation is a part I really enjoyed for a bunch of reasons. One, I was like, damn, this is a lot of animals. And then you see that, like, sticky note that's like, this is only 24. You really get 66 of them. And I'm like, I couldn't think of 66 animals right now anyway. But I also liked I really enjoyed the asymmetry of all of the different animals, and not only that, the different styles of animals too. So like, in the game right now, there's, you know, 4 of each, but there's like fuzzy, feathery, warded, scaly, shelled, and crawly. And a lot of games, when you have different styles, will be like, you know, if it's going to be health grit and DR or whatever, we're going to have like 10 total points, and we'll just like mix them so everyone kind of equals 10, you know? And as I was reading through this, I was like, none of that is in here at all. Like, there's whole sections where like Scaly has DR, but like Warded doesn't. You get more like more grit or whatever, and like Scaly doesn't have a bonus to health, but you get some other things too. So there's a real asymmetry to it, which I think really lends into that. Like, well, it's because a 1 foot tall giraffe is different than a frog. Like, you don't need those same things. You're not supposed to do those same things. So leaning into like what a frog does really well, or what a giraffe does really well, is what the character creation kind of, and the abilities you get with it feels like to me. I assume, kind of based on what you're talking about, like that was the intent, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, exactly. When I was putting together the different categories, so, you know, fuzzy, feathery, and down the line, and then mechanicalizing them to where like, well, what would a turtle have that like a frog wouldn't, or that a little mouse wouldn't? Well, you know, obviously there's a big shell on their back, but shelled also receive, I believe, a certain extra amount of like SP, so you can carry more stuff. The thinking there is you can just put stuff into your shell.
Put stuff in the shell.
That's probably not how that works. But if you're playing, and that's how some of the conversation that me and Wythe have had sometimes is like, could you realistically, if you were a turtle, stuff into your shell? Not really. It's not how that works. But if I was playing a cartoon, that's what I would intuitively want to do. So that's the guiding, I think, focus. When and where I think it makes sense. There's been times where we've reined it in a little bit. But for the most part, I like advocate, like, yeah, if I was playing as a frog, I would want to be able to jump farther than this thing, even if realistically that doesn't like make sense. We're playing a cartoon and people are playing a frog, they're going to want to be able to use their tongue to do this thing, or to have any of these other like cartoony tropes kind of be the guiding focus. So I guess back to what you were initially asking, the goal was to have each of the categories feel distinct, like narratively, but also mechanically, so that you do get the benefit of being a turtle, and it's a way different play experience than playing like a roach, which Wythe enjoys playing roaches.
I play a roach. I mean, and I will say, because there's a difference with like balance is this thing in game design that I find really annoying, because it's often tied to mechanics in terms of numbers, like quantitative balance. Like you're saying, like, okay, I have 10 points to distribute in 4 different categories. So we'll just create a bunch of categories where there's different arrays of those same 10 points. But we've found in practice, running for 10 years versions of Stillfleet, and now intensively a lot of Blister Critters in the last few months, that that isn't as satisfying as having balance that is sort of more narrative driven. Like in Stillfleet, there's a class that has the power to end combat arbitrarily, to smooth things over, the diplomat social scientist class. And that's completely asymmetrical to all the other combat powers because it ends combat. So that's been really nice because you can have a party with a witness or with no witness, and that will change how you do combat. Because if you're getting pwned by Cthulhu, the witness could be like, guys, let's just talk it out and then run away, you know. And if you don't have that person, it's going to feel different. So it's not a matter of whether their stats are good or not. It's like, does that person exist? And I think here I think Tony and I netted on something really nicely that fulfills Tony's vision of a zany cartoon universe, where like the SP for being typically bigger, you know, like an alligator or a turtle. Also, you just have like flat areas you could strap stuff to. I mean, we just sort of justified it however you want. Or it's cartoony and you open the secret compartment on your shell and drop stuff in, which is like not how turtles work. Don't do that to a turtle. It works either way, and it feels nice because it's like, cool, that's their thing. They get more grit, they get more SP because their body plan, but the fuzzy animals get more health because of our metabolisms. So essentially, as long as we're eating, we've taken over the world because of being warm-blooded. So it was just very simple, like trying to marry some of the what ifs about biology with these kind of asymmetrical decisions to provide a kind of balance. So everything gets something fun, but it doesn't have to feel A, like a biology textbook, or B, to me, like a more boring game, like a 5e style, like every category is strictly quantitatively balanced. And to me, that makes them a little too similar to one another, and they don't have that radical difference of like, cool, I'm a roach. I'm like, yeah, I could be a foot tall roach, but I'm not going to be. I'm going to be like a pretty big roach, like a gross, large size, like
it's
4 inches.
Post-apocalyptic cartoon land. Like you're
right.
Massive.
But I'm not going to be a foot tall, and I am squishy, right? I'm just a roach. Like, and so, I whatever.
Crunchy.
So it's just, it's a different vibe.
Crunchy.
Crunchy, exactly.
Yeah.
Something that's also been fun.
Well, I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
Something that's also been fun that we found in playtesting, but also kind of trying to future-proof or think forward in terms of like character creation and like party creation, a pack of animals, is like, well, what if people want to play a group of frogs? Like, what does that do if everybody is the same kind of animal, or if everybody, we haven't touched on this yet, what if everybody picks the same role? What if they all want to be the boss? Or what if they all want to be a wallflower? What does that do for party creation? And that's true for most any like tabletop game that'll have those kind of archetypes in there. But specifically for Blister Critters, it's fun in that like the roles and then the kind of animals that you're gonna pair with them. There's already a number of other choices on the menu where you can be a group of frogs, but one of those group of frogs can be the brawler, and one of those frogs can be like the brain of the group. So you can play a pack of frogs and go through a whole season playing Battletoads if you really want to. Right. Yeah, I think there's so much freedom and so much unexplored territory that I'm excited to see other people try out and min-max to their heart's delight.
Right. Yeah. Like TMNT. We talked a lot about
group of turtles, just 4 turtles. They're all wearing like a little mask, and they all got like little plastic weapons they found, stuff, I think that's where we're going.
The one rat's the leader. Yeah, it all makes perfect sense. We're good here. God, there's so many, like, we could talk for like 2 hours on just like the fun parts of the system, like the surge die and things like that. One of the things, one thing, and then I'll say the thing I was really talking about, what we were just talking about, there's a lot of, one thing I really enjoy in the way that the game is written too, is how much direction there is for exactly what we all just talked about. Like over and over again, it's like, do fun shit because it's fun. Like, I don't care that things don't fit in your shell. It's a cartoon. Like, there's a real sense of like strong mechanics mixed with this desire to, I think this was something I was trying to say before and my brain went a different direction. It's the rules feel so clean and easy, not easy, but like just straightforward. So you kind of really early get this sense of like, I can internalize them well enough to know when I can break and tweak them. Even as a player, even as I'm just like reading it, not just writing it. And I think that cartoon aspect really kind of lends to that in the system too, especially in like the nonsense powers and things like that, where it's just the system allows for that extra without the whole thing like falling apart. And that just feels really cool to see and to approach in a game where you're like, I could be the rage guy and go absolutely ape shit, and I'm not going to break this for the GM or for the other players. Like, there's plenty of room to kind of go off. And one of the things that really allows that too, early in the quick start, you talk about zany versus gnarly, which, I mean, as far as I'm the gnarly, I would definitely go gnarly games, and I feel like Hunter would definitely go zany games. So I guess just talk about that a little bit. Like, what was the reason to not only kind of have that as an option, but to reinforce that kind of throughout too, with different ways to approach things?
Yeah, this is, I mean, Tony and I talked a lot about this. Tony, do you want to sort of start off, or?
Yeah, I think we can bounce back and forth on it, because it's really like it came from me and Wythe working together and talking through and how we wanted the game to feel. So I definitely approach producing GMing episodes very zany. I lean full on into it being a cartoon, and just pause to the wall, go nuts with it being a cartoon, zaniness. And that was in the initial like writings and ideas. It's kind of what I pitched to Wythe, was this world that's like strictly cartoony and zany and stuff. And Wythe kind of bounced off of that a little bit in a good way and was like, well, what if we incorporate things that are, more serious, or the gnarly bits of it where it's like, well, this really was a world that humans did once live in, and they did have these impacts, and what would society look like for animals that are rebuilding a civilization, with or without the knowledge that the humans had. And I like Blister Critters more now that I think it accommodates both ends, where you can play a episode of SpongeBob, but you can play an episode of, I guess, whatever would be the other end, where it's more focused and
The Last of Us.
Like you could play like
Walking
Last
Dead,
of,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I run it as Walking Dead, but it looks like Ren and Stimpy, but you're in The Walking Dead. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And just
like
instead
it
of
as
zombies, they're
both.
just black bears with mutant, with like tentacles, and an elk with the skull. The head is just a skull, and there's like some sort of slime dripping out of their neck. But it's The Walking Dead, right? You're a bunch of critters who are smart. The physics is the same. It's just the world's gone to shit. Humans fucked it up. You got to live here now, and you're like, well, I guess we got to make the most of it, and you have to like help each other and survive. Tony runs it where the physics are cartoon physics, and I think that was such a fun challenge, and I'm really appreciate that Tony worked with me, because I was like, this is so fun, and I know it would work and it would be fun and it would probably like sell even if it was just the purely cartoony. But I was like, come on, man, I'm a Marxist scholar. Like, can we make this about like climate change kind of and like environmental disruption? Like, can we make it like also about those things and not take away from what you want to do? And Tony was a real sport, and we just sort of thought through in each rules section, okay, is there a way to modulate or offer opinions? And what I had suggested was based on a game called Rotted Capes, which is a game I've read. I've never actually played, but is interesting because it's a superhero game, but it's in a zombie apocalypse. So it's intentionally a mashup, and it has throughout these boxes on like almost every spread where it's like, if you're playing, I forget the terms he uses, but like pulp, action, comic, like it's pretty much just superheroes and there happen to be zombies, then do this. If you're playing the zombie apocalypse version, where it's very, very much about survival, and most of the A-listers, the Supermans of the world, have been turned to zombies. So they're still alive and they have laser eyes and they can fly, but they're zombies. They just want to eat your brains. Then like you're kind of screwed, and like do this. And there's also sort of the implied thing is that the main text is the middle option. Or you don't have to make that choice. Like, it's kind of a spectrum, and you can ignore it or you can lean one direction or other. So I sort of suggested to Tony we could do something similar, and we found the words gnarly and zany to describe these play styles, where it's very silly and you are cartoon animals, but physics are basically physics. Or it's very zany in your cartoon animals, but you're literally just purely in a cartoon. There's no like outside of the cartoon. It's not a comment on something. It's a cartoon per song. And so that was fun to just sort of check ourselves. Like, is a given rule set, so gnarly or so zany that it's going to like upset the balance of the universe? And honestly, I don't think players even really care, or like they get it so intuitively. It hasn't mattered in a good way. Like, it hasn't come up as like, hey, this feels too zany. Or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Wythe, you're not letting me be cartoon. Like, if someone suggests something cartoony, I'm like, awesome, that happens. It just was more for me, like, as a GM, I basically constantly reinvent these stories about politics. So it instantly was about squirrels take over Atlanta. They set up a feudal society. They demand, taxes. And you, as these other critters, have to like figure out how to, push back on that or overthrow the queen or whatever. But yes, you're all sort of cartoons and mutants and all this other fun stuff. So it's somewhat like, just what kind of games do you like to run, I think.
Yeah.
That's so. Go ahead, Tony.
I also like that it's not necessarily a binary either. You can run a super zany game, and then if you want to have super hardcore rules about like this is the kind of food you can eat, and you as a producer want to lean into, you can only eat food that you could actually consume. You could do that. It might feel weird if you're, you know, blowing your arm up like a balloon and bonking people on the head. But like if that's what the table likes, there's rules in there for you to pick and choose what parts of the game you want to be zany, what parts you want to be gnarly. And it should be a conversation. It should be like evolving and changing where we're playing an episode where we're just going to go to the mall and have a good time. But then there's an episode where like we're fighting like the bad guy and we're going to play a little bit more serious, a little bit more gnarly. I like that you can do both.
And it's pushed back on me. Like I have two examples. Sorry if we, you know, if we have time, that I'll keep short. But in recent playtests with a playtester who plays a lot named Ryan, who's really great. You know, he played a turtle who was a dasher. So his mutant power is that he's superhumanly fast or super turtle-ish fast. Super turtly fast. But he's a turtle, and also like he was like, wait a second, turtles can't hold things, so how do I grab that? And so we joked that you never see him do it. So in this kind of, because I think he's used to my gnarly style of gaming. Everyone at the tables were kind of playing a gnarly game. So it's not that it didn't happen. It's just you never see it. So every scene, he's at the back of the group and he's like, well, I don't know, guys. And then cut to he's at the front of the line. He's the first to act. And you just never like it's a joke of camera cuts, right? And so we leaned into the cartoon aspect in a meta sense without changing the gnarliness, the gnarly level of the feel of their campaign. And then another thing in just trying to write this to plug the quick Kickstarter, you know, if you reserve a copy before the Kickstarter, you get a short zine about the Squirrel Queendom of Atlanta that's basically just coming out of a campaign I've been running. And I was just trying to write out all this stuff, and it's in the voice of the squirrels, and they're explaining to you their faction, and you know, you get all these little venture hooks basically. But one of the things is they just rediscovered like they're paying soldiers in food and also goof juice, which is clearly like bottles of tequila and vodka they found in the club in downtown Atlanta. And so I was trying to write that out. And even then it's like hard not to be cartoony. So I was like, yeah, there's a special kind of more fun water that our smartest of scientists have dubbed Goofy Juice, or simply Goof, in honor of our wacky buddy, Ronald T. Juice. We love that guy. And it's just that kind of like energy that I'm like, you know, I'm just going to keep that in, even though it makes it's definitely not gnarly, but it's like, yeah, this is a cartoon and I want people to have the feeling that they could run it in that completely just batshit cartoony style. So yeah,
it's interesting how good of like a groove you guys have carved out in like this narrative space that you're like operating in. Like it does really seem like it works incredibly well. I mean, even like if we go to maybe not just Saturday morning cartoons, but kind of cartoons that go on like episodically that have like this deeper narrative. Sometimes they do have these moments that are really zany, and sometimes they do have these moments that are like, wow, it's fucking emotionally heavy, or like sometimes physics do matter, sometimes they don't. It doesn't really matter because it's about like the episode narrative that you're in. So earlier, before we started talking, you guys kind of mentioned like player agency within the rules and how they're written. I would really like to hear you expand upon that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, that's like my favorite, I think one of, if not the favorite bit of Blister Critters for me, especially producing it, is I think it's born out of how I just run games generally, where I'm very like player forward. I do very little prep, very improv heavy, and so Blister Critters allows me to lean into that a lot. But in that, a lot of Blister Critters is set up so that it's very familiar and easy to pick up and just really dive into from a player perspective. So there's not this prerequisite of knowledge for like, what's the name of this weird medieval weapon, or I need to have some kind of, you know, knowledge about how the Old West was set up, or what's the name for this like sci-fi thing. All of those have a million great games, a Stillfleet included. But for Blister Critters specifically, it's your house, it's your world, it's you know, it's the 7-Eleven, it's Walmart, it's, you know, it's the arcade. And so in that, there's like an immediate click for players that I've seen, and I think Wythe has seen as well, where players that are getting into it, there's not like, the world is strange, but it's very familiar. And so then in that, when you're like running through a house, and they're like, I want to find like a cool weapon, what's around? I'm like, well, you're in a kid's room. What would be in a kid's room? And so as part of setting up a scene or setting up a location in the rules, it's suggested, encouraged that producers ask players, ask the people at the table, what's the theme of this room? It's dinosaur themed. Sweet, cool. Can you give me like 3 big pieces of furniture that would be in this room? And then I look to a different player. Yeah, there's a big dinosaur lamp, and there's something hanging from the ceiling, and the bed itself is shaped like a triceratops head. Sweet. What's his favorite? What was this kid's favorite color? Green. And then this whole room is made for me as the producer, but now the players are super invested in this dinosaur green room, where they already know there's like a mecha triceratops figure that's on one of the shelves that they can definitely use as like a blaster, has a little like plastic pellet that'll shoot out of it, or has like laser eyes. And that's been a lot of fun to like encourage, and running it, people get that like immediately. So all of this stuff, and all of, at least the way that I run it, everything is super player generated. Where when we did an actual play recently, and I knew that it was going to be in an arcade, and I knew that there was going to be like an alligator like mob boss. But prior to the episode, a core part of Blister Critters is prior to each episode, we're offering like a book of ad libs. So like a fill in the blank sheet where as people are settling in at the table, you would pass it around as the GM, as the producer, and they can fill it in. And then the idea is that just as the episode is starting, just as you guys get ready to play, you read off this a crappy infomercial filled in with all of the weird adjectives and stuff. So as part of that, the players of our actual play called it the Roly Poly Arcade. There was a big skee ball machine that was shaped like a dog's head, and like a number of other things that like I had not set up in that location prior, but became like integral parts of that episode. As we walked into the arcade, I went around the table again and asked for like, there's a restaurant in here, and what's the name of the restaurant? What do they serve? And Wythe had like a Tex-Mex place that's in the corner of this like Chuck E. Cheese. Another player introduced like this big ball pit, but because the place was called Roly Poly, instead of like plastic colorful balls, they were all shaped like gross bugs all wrapped up. And all of those elements play in. Somebody slipped on one of the gross like burritos later in the episode. They swapped out one of the balls with the gross bug balls while they were doing their final match off against the alligator mob boss, playing skee ball for to win to save the day essentially. And all of that is just a lot of fun. I think it puts a certain amount of responsibility on players that maybe other systems don't. But I think because it's so familiar, and because the rules are as like freeing and quick to grab as they are, it makes all of that like on the spot content creation super, super easy and super fun for them, because now they're like, I made up that there's a dog shaped skee ball machine, and now we're playing on the dog shaped skee ball machine. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also a rule of like coming up with canonical products in the game universe, and that works really well with campaign play, where each time I like check in with players, and if they don't have an idea, it's totally fine, and we kind of just quickly move on. But sometimes people will have an idea, and so with this convention where I ran a few in a row, and some people were playing multiple times. Like one person said, one of the members of the studio said 𝗕𝗟𝗬𝗧𝗘𝗥 mouth ointment, which was like a goop style like toothpaste that comes in like a bamboo box for some reason, and we were all just like grossed out by that. But what came up more is somebody said Marge bar, and we were like, Marge bar, okay, go on. And he was like, just the hair. And we were like, what is it? He's like, it's an oversized, it's like an XL size candy bar that's all blue chocolate all the way down. It's just solid blue chocolate in the shape. And the commercials are like all really sad. It's like her anxiety is like the thing foregrounded by this brand, where it's like, oh. And so we kept finding, Marge bar became the go-to food. That was one of the main things that the Squirrel Legionaries like. That's kind of what they relied upon, is they had found troves of this off-brand, or like was like a knockoff of the Simpsons or something brand candy bar. And so I love that the sort of player agency, it's just saying the quiet part out loud. It's like what every GM wants is for players to be like, yeah, the tavern also has my buddy from whatever medieval high school, is behind the bar now, and I'm an adventurer, and like there's a weird thing going on. But players often don't do that. They don't necessarily feel empowered. So I really appreciate that Tony made that a core piece of Blister Critters, to try to think of rules where it's like at the beginning of the game, ask people to do a little of that work. And even if they don't do it, frankly, it at least like puts that thought in their head. And then maybe over time they're going to feel more comfortable saying, you know what, I do have an idea for what's in this room. I do have an idea for sort of the world and not just my perspective. So I think it's not something unique to this game, but it's something we definitely wanted to sort of underline and carry throughout the book.
Well, one thing I love that, and I think one of the reasons it works so well is because of the, like you said, the instant familiarity you get because you're playing in this like human world. So we all know the things. You're like, you're in a room and you're like, I'm in a room. It could be any of these things. So they're like, it's really easy. It reminds me, like part of this reminds me a little bit of Mouse Ritter, in that in Mouse Ritter, you exist in a human world and all the things you find are human. So it's really easy to be like, oh, well, my sword's just a needle or whatever. You don't have to make up fantasy stuff or whatever. You can just see things that are really familiar to you. And I think having that player agency in a system and a world that makes it easy because it is the world we already live in just really feeds into that a lot more than it might. It would still be fun in, like I said, like a fantasy medieval world or whatever, but I feel like it might be a little bit more difficult because you have to think about what's in like a fantasy medieval room versus knowing what you're in there already. So it's just a really good, like the two mesh really well together to make it, even bigger and even better in that an aspect that's really, really cool and really fun to see.
Yeah, it ties in really well with one of the massive pillars of Blister Critters being stuff. So like down all the equipment, all of the things that people want to pick up and swing around like a weapon, you're really only limited by what you're willing to ask for as a player. So like as part of the rules in the core book, we have like something like 200 like listed stuff currently for people to use as whatever they would want. But like one of my favorites that's actually in the quick start is an action figure arm, and just like this big buff arm with like spikes on it. And I found that people like using it. I've had a player where their legs were blown off. They were a praying mantis, and both of their one set of two legs were blown off, and they just so happened to have two action figure limbs on them at the time. And they asked me, and like, before the next episode starts, because we are at the end of the episode, could I talk to like the burrow medic or whoever and have them attach both of the action figure limbs to my praying mantis body? And because I run a super zany game and I wanted them to be able to do that, I was like, absolutely. So at the start of the next episode, they're also a brawler, so it kind of made sense. They're like the buff fighting person of the group. They started the next episode, the next session, with two of their legs, just these big hulking plastic arms that don't bend right. But now they get to do these really sweet punch kicks in combat, and stuff like that is just a lot of fun.
Punch kicker. The number of times I've thought of Community through this too, which is not a cartoon, but is probably the most cartoon live action show ever. Even in like let's have a zany one, but like let's make it like extremely depressingly existential when you realize why everyone is a clay figure, One of the things that's come up a bunch, and a thing that I really, really enjoy is episodes. The scenes, the pre-show, all of that stuff. We talked about it feeling like a Saturday morning cartoon, in like the vibes and a lot of the stuff you do, but actually the way you play the game as far as your sessions and things really feed into that as well. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, about why and how that works? Because I really, really enjoy that mechanic as well.
Yeah, that's just another step towards mechanicalizing vibes, of having it set up so that like when you play Blister Critters, you are playing in an episode. Things are delineated by scenes, much like a cartoon or a more serious animated show would be. And in that way, it lets you segment play and approach play in a way where you're using terms that are like associated with TV shows and movies and stuff, but also puts you in a position where play can be segmented up like little beats, like little narrative story beats, much like a cartoon would be, where maybe the narrative doesn't take through the whole episode. You get through this kind of weird interaction in 1 or 2 scenes, and then something totally different happens. And that's you're able to do that through Blister Critters, through setting things up, and then through setting things up in that way. But I also enjoy like the aesthetic of it, I guess, of like making sure that every aspect of Blister Critters that I can like really double down on, be like, no, this is a cartoon. Even if you're playing gnarly, I want it to be super undeniable in every weird facet that I can make it. You're playing through a cartoon. The GM is the producer. You are characters on a TV show. Yeah, I don't know if Wythe, you have something more specific to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, you know, went to school to be a screenwriter, and I love that format. And I think there's something really fulfilling still about the kind of Aristotelian arc, and, you know, having a climax. I love ending on a cliffhanger, and I play a lot of campaigns of now Stillfleet, and what before that became Stillfleet, sort of an OSR game that evolved into this rule set. And so I approach Blister Critters the same. So even if we don't call them episodes in another game, it's like that format works really well. For a variety of reasons. I think there's like an inherent like narrative reason it works, and also it's a familiarity thing. People know what TV is. We all watch a lot of episodic content, so people know like, okay, we have 15 minutes left IRL. We're going towards some kind of ending, and you can, as a player, you let your unconscious like formulate. All right, I'm going to do one more crazy thing. You know, I'm going to get in the limelight one more time. As a GM, you're like, okay, crap, I have to like get somewhere. So I think it's effective, even again if you don't call it out, but making that quiet part louder and very apparent throughout was really nice with Blister Critters, because you know, there's a number of other games doing that also now, which I think makes total sense. I don't know why we weren't doing that years ago in game design, but it works really well, because with imagination-based games, you are kind of telling these stories, and you do have to be attentive to like, well, so-and-so's got to leave at, you know, 3, whatever. So there's just there are these pressures to kind of tighten time and organize time, but you don't want it to be on fun. You don't want to be like time referee. So I think having the idea of an episodes have a certain arc, they have a certain length, is sort of a natural way to like, in a way, make that less anxiety producing, that like, yo, we're only going to play so much content today, and that can be one episode in a show, and the show is ongoing. Cartoons that we grew up with generally go on forever, and sometimes to their detriment. I mean, you're thinking of Dragon Ball Z, which I have fond memories of watching. I mean, half of the time it was a guy just doing this with, you know, animated fire around him.
Hey, listen, that show's perfect in every way.
Sure.
Something, because one of my ideas for a character was a turtle that watched DBZ and for bulk up did Kaioken, you know?
Awesome.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I love, and I guess, you know, you could play a campaign like that where like, okay, roll to see how cool you look as you stare at the camera. But I just mentioned that I think Tony had also had this idea of like, well, because I play Stillfleet campaigns, I have several that currently that have gone on for like 4 years, you know, that are still active. But I think one of the ideas here was like, what if you had roughly a season of like 10 episodes, and then kind of everyone's dead or a mutant, or you probably want to try something else, even if you just want to try maybe another game of Blister Critters with a new animal. So we tried to keep that in mind, that like critters don't live that long, and the kinds of epic, even like political shenanigans they get up to with their burrows are not going to be as big and epic as a human scale kind of game. So yeah, we tried to think about, okay, you're playing roughly 10 2 to 4 hour episodes, and what could you do in that time?
Yeah.
And so the book kind of assumes that you could easily do other things, but I think that was again good call on Tony's choice in terms of helping us design a book, right?
Yeah, I think keeping
and
it
you
short...
can only do 3 seasons anyway, because then, you know, they cut your funding and redo your contract.
That's
anyway,
true.
so,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, exactly. You have to go pitch Amazon or something. Yeah.
Well, one thing I really love about the episodes too, and this is just another way that the game continues to reinforce itself, is again the familiarity. The same thing with the setting with the episodes too, because I mean, almost all of us are millennial, post-millennial, or, you know, elder millennials. We did grow up with those Sunday morning cartoons, and we know exactly what the pre-show is. We know exactly what the recap is, when half of DBZ was just recapping how they stood there, you know, for the entire episode, and then the scenes, and then the ending credits and everything too. So there is still that really good sense of familiarity that you already understand the concept from other parts of the game. So when it happens episodically too, you're like, oh, this is just like that other thing. Like I feel like it's a lot of game of like references to things that which just makes it so much more approachable, which is really great.
Yeah, and it's even part of like the powers that producers have to do like cutaways, like I was describing earlier. Like it's I'm sure it didn't originate in SpongeBob, but that's my touchstone for it, is like the harsh cutaway to like an overly painted, like Ren and Stimpy does them as well. The overly painted and super detailed shot. I like doing those in my games. But when I produce, I also like to lean into describing things like the camera pans down or the camera follows this here. And while I'm producing, while I'm going through it, I try to keep in mind, like, what does this look like? How can I impart that? And I think players really get a lot out of that. And they know how to lean into it, because they do know, like, at the end of an episode, like, I'm going to use all of my grit. I'm going to go for it. But I think, to backtrack only slightly, having them be episodic and having them be smaller in scope encourages people to go all out with their critter. If you only get 10 episodes, you're not going to waste an episode sitting around. You're going to make sure you go for it every time. Yeah.
So yeah, love the game. It's fantastic. Can't wait to get it. Can't wait to play it. Can't wait to review it here on the show. We could talk about this for hours and hours, but also this is going to be a Kickstarter. This is happening for Zine Quest. So as far as the Kickstarter goes, I guess first, we'll post the dates, obviously, but what are the dates for the Kickstarter? What can people expect from the Kickstarter? And if you guys know, like, I mean, whatever you want to say. If you want to do price ranges, tiers, talk about this box set I keep hearing about. I got a whole bookshelf that's literally just box sets, so I'll make room. Talk to me about the Kickstarter. What do people need to know? What can people expect, and how much do they need to put aside before February for this project?
Yeah. Well, it is going to be a Kickstarter for Zine Quest. And I think that makes sense given, it's that time of the year. And it feels it's an indie game. I mean, at the end of the day, so it's a little more ambitious than some of the work Tony and I have done before, but it's still just us, right? It's not a big company, so it's Zine Questy. So February 6th is when we're targeting the launch, and you can pick up just the PDF if you just want the rules, all the rules. But you can also pick up the book. But what we really want to sell is the box set, because we think that's kind of the full experience. It's obviously the book also has a bunch of other pieces that Tony has created. So he's making this giant, oversized, double-sided poster of stuff. So tons and tons of artwork. And on the back, the rules for, I don't know how much, we could probably fit 200 like rules for stuff. So that would be actually a handy reference, right? And it'll look cool. If you like Tony's art, it's really rad. Check it out. You can also get cards, which is a big focus, and we'd like to hit stretch goals to do more cards. So we're definitely putting in the box 48 cards, and we may be able to do more if we hit some stretch goals. The cards will have beasts and glyphs, and so those will be fun. As a GM, I mean, I play a lot over Discord, and I do this with cards for Stillfleet, where we can still hold them up the camera and show you the art. And it's just a fast way. It has the rules on one side, art on the other. So it's useful for GMing. It's just a fun, interactive experience. And who doesn't like, a booster pack of awesome art and fun ideas, right? So you can use them in your games. They might inspire something a little bit different format. Some people are a little more sort of visual, tactile, as opposed to flipping through the book. There's also stickers. Who doesn't like a sheet of like high quality vinyl stickers? Again, of Tony's awesome art. And there's dice. So that is sort of what's in the box. If we don't hit any stretch goals, but we are able to produce this game, you can get sort of the full experience. And then as we have stretch goals, those will also go in the deluxe Kickstarter exclusive box, right? So that is our focus, is trying to make this box as awesome as possible, produce a lot of them so that we have the ability to kind of bring Blister Critters to the world post Kickstarter. And really, so we can make more of it, because we have a lot of ideas for other fun things we could do, but we would need to, sell enough of these boxes to sort of sustain that and do future rules and playing as plants and fungi and all kinds of other fun things that we've dreamed up. So, Tony, do you want to add any sort of details there? I mean, there's a lot to say.
No, please. Kickstarter launches February 6th. Go to blistercritters.com and hit the little notify button so you get a nice email for when we actually go live. Earlier, Wythe was talking about a squirrel queendom set in Atlanta that he is putting together. You can reserve your copy of Blister Critters early for $1 at play.blistercritters.com. And that'll get you exclusive access to that zine when it goes up, the Squirrel zine. We're not going to be selling it outside of that website and that link. So play.blistercritters.com to grab up the Squirrel zine, blistercritters.com to get notified on February 6th when we launch. Yeah, I'm really excited about the box set. I think it looks badass. We're filling it with all kinds of cool stuff. I think I'm most stoked about the cards and just being able to have this really rad set of beasts and glyphs and all kinds of other wacky things that are going to go on the cards. Yeah, if we can hit the stretch goals, we have some plans, I think, further down the stretch goal line for adding in rules like Wythe said, for playing as mushrooms and for expanding upon stuff, and having like food glyphs and all kinds of our ideas aren't satiated. We have so much more to write and put into it. We're kind of just limited by the scope of how well we fund and seeing what is going to push us forward next for Blister Critters and the Stillfleet studio as a whole.
Yeah, and Tony's time, because the art is amazing and Tony's already done so much, but we've scoped out like, wow, this is like hundreds of cool cartoon animal scenes you have to draw. So to some degree, that's why we've chosen the products that we have for the box. We think it's a really good deal. And just to talk numbers, since you had brought that up as well, it's going to retail for more than this after, but on the Kickstarter, the box is $45, but the first 200 people can get it for $39. So that's a pretty significant discount. And as Tony said, if you go to play.blistercritters.com for $1 extra, you can also get a zine that you can only get that way about, essentially this setting and faction sort of with some other little mechanical things. So we think it's a really fun set of objects, and there's like tons of stuff to do there, and you can easily make your own. One of the people on our server that we play with a lot, who lives in Australia, is already making like, okay, but I have to do the Australian version because the animals and plants are very different there. Tony and I grew up, in the Sun Belt. I live in New York, and so it sort of reflects like East Coast urban suburban life. But we have all these ideas for like, oh, we have to do, a very rural setting. Like I want to do one set in like the swamps of Louisiana, like where my family is from, and that's not going to be in the book right now, but if we hit a bunch of stretch goals, maybe we'll have to add some stuff. So,
oh, dude, I was immediately, especially after you talking about like the squirrel adventure in Atlanta that is based off of your own experience, I was thinking of like, man, if I ran a game here, because I'm in Eugene, Oregon, I'm like, what would I do? And there's like hundreds of geese and ducks here, and so I was like, oh, the concordance of geese. They've taken over Eugene. Yeah. But yeah, I think this is so rife with like, I think at one point in time we were talking to Eco from the Lost Bay about how you take these games and when Lost Bay tries to put stuff out, they try to strip away as much as they can and let you project your own experience onto what comes out, like Sky Realms. And this is another great one for you. Like you can get this in hand and project your own experience of like suburbia or like my weird rural art town that I live in, and the animals that live there or the wildlife there, and how you can create your own adventure. It's so cool. I'm really genuinely so excited to play this. And I definitely have a screen pulled up right now. That's the Lane County wildlife. And
yes.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love hearing people like, oh, what if I got to do it in my town? Like, that's perfect. That's all I really want out of sharing the game, is that people can be a little rat, be a little lizard, and go blow up their local Walmart.
Yeah, and I love Eco's work. I love Lost Bay, and I think there is something about the finding the balance. And that's something we try to do really hard. That's like one of the precepts of the Stillfleet studio, is like making games that have that feeling of depth, but they're not restrictive. And there's kind of constant reminders like hack this, make stuff up, add stuff here. This is a sketch. This is a MacGuffin. So with the flagship sci-fi game, we have tons of like lore, but if you actually read it, it's mostly like 2 paragraphs of like, yeah, the company went here. Some guys got blasted by lasers. We ended up working out a deal. That was 20 years ago. I don't know. Maybe you should go back. So it's sort of these evocative like possibilities that they're sort of nods at genres or tropes or references. And we've seen GMs use those and tell amazing stories and really make different worlds their own. So I think here, even more so to Tony's point, that it's actual industrial modernity, just poof, no humans. So it's very easy. It should be easy for literally anyone to be like, cool, I'm going to set it in the elementary school I attended. That's where the critters are. Or I'm going to set it at the shopping mall near me. Or I went on vacation once and I'm going to, so it's like there should be a lot of ideas percolating. And certainly it's not restrictive in the slightest. And there is no setting with Blister Critters that's detailed in full, just because it's like, yeah, the setting is your place you live, and there's lots of rules about how, from more optional to like the core, just rolling noggin to find stuff you want. There's ways to mechanicalize it, but it's done in a kind of light way that's meant to find that balance. So it feels deep. It implies that stuff went on, the poof was bad, but from the perspective of the critters, you are wherever you are and you're just trying to survive. So that's been fun. That's definitely been fun to see how different people, play out.
And I mean, let's talk about the art too, real quick. Okay. How nice is it to have an in-house artist? And anytime that you can have someone who is this like this dual threat, that's designer, that can also like actually do the art for what they see, is fantastic. So I mean, love your art, Tony. All super jealous that you can do that and also design a good game too. So that's it's good for you guys.
Yeah, it's something. When it's something when we're talking about, let's just do like in our high pie in the sky dreams, like let's just do 100 cards. That's probably not going to be happening. But then when I sat down, I was like, logistically, it's 100 illustrations that I have to do, and it'd be really, really rad. But I don't know that we can do that. So I also suffer from being like, okay, it's not enough for me just to write this. I'm going to illustrate this as well. So every page that I can fill with artwork, I am definitely going to, because I like art heavy, like tabletop games, and I like the idea, and I like when I am able to do is flipping the page and having this wholly unique spread full of work. So getting to do that is fun, but it is wildly time consuming, time consuming to do, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah. And it's fun to work on something that's a little more art driven, because while Stillfleet, we had a very distinct visual style, and Ethan, the lead artist, was involved from the very beginning of making that a product and has contributed a lot both to the ideas in the game as well as obviously the art. It was driven by like, I'm a professional writer and had already written a book. So this is a little different in that Tony had written some things, but it was more like, all right, let's talk about what you want to do and look at the art. And then in a way, you're going to write a thing and I'm going to help write bits, and we're going to kind of edit it and figure out the mechanics together based on the art. Like he said, like that was that incipient, like we have to make a game about this art because the art is so cool, which is very different from how I would work, just because I can't draw, right? So that's just not how I make games. So that's been fun and really easy. And I think we'll probably end up doing, mix of these things in the future. So.
Yeah, the Sunday morning cartoon thing, the kid like toy thing and everything, if at some point in the future you could just go on the website and buy booster packs of cards, that'd be so cool to be able to just like peel it open like a Pokemon pack and you get like a new character option or like new stuff options, new bliff. That would be fantastic. I mean, we'll see how it funds, but honestly, if you read this Kickstarter or the quick start, I can't imagine someone's going to be like, no, this is like super cool, so I'm just going to not. Like, this project looks great. It sounds great. The art's fantastic. The mechanics are great. Again, super, super excited for this. We talked about Stillfleet a bunch. What's up?
If you weren't convinced by the quick start, check out the video that we just dropped on my Twitter. There is a bit of animation that I've done. So there is actually a Blister Critters 30 seconds of a Blister Critters cartoon that is canonized, as well as a bit of a shoddy infomercial that I shot in my bedroom. I'm very proud of it. That's going to be the Kickstarter video with some updates as we get closer to the launch.
Yeah.
So if the quick start isn't convincing, have me shout at you for a minute and a half in a really goofy voice, and that should do the trick.
Yeah, as I'm saying, he's a triple threat. He's also doing animation. I mean, it's wild. So it's been wild to work with someone who can just bring that energy and talent to every aspect of this. And all we have to do is, edit it, make a product, like the sort of the other stuff that I would have no idea how to animate this. So
make capitalism happen. Cool. Yeah,
we're do a capitalism. Yeah, hit the button. Yeah, there's a huge red button that says "Make the thing" and pipes that connects us to Shenzhen or whatever. I don't know. It's a whole thing.
Critter in the future can find a box set and wonder what this thing is that's inside, and it's
Exactly. There is canonically the game Stillfleet in the universe of Stillfleet, and it's kind of stuck in there. So I think this is similar where I think, Tony, you've already drawn some of the critters playing with polyhedral dice and stuff. So I think that's on our brains, but yeah.
Well, I think they're one of the, I can't remember which one it is, that has an ability that it can squeeze through any space that would fit a D20. And I was like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So we talked about Stillfleet a bunch. Where can people find Stillfleet so that they can check out kind of where this grid system, the core system that was adapted into Blister Critters came from?
Yeah, so stillfleet.com is where all our stuff lives, and we're redoing it right now. So in part, mostly because of Blister Critters, but also with the SRD coming out. I mean, we're going to have the grid system SRD. We have a license, so we really want people to use the grid system and have fun with it. And Blister Critters is going to be sort of our first shining example of that, of working with someone else to make it official. But in a way, it was, Tony could have easily just made a thing using our rules. And again, there's a license, so we want people to use our rules, and we want to make that easier. So we're working on it. It's just a small team. So we're doing the site right now. And we will have later in the year, we're going to reprint the sci-fi stuff. So you'll be able to get those books physically. In the meantime, you can get the PDFs. So, we're on itch, we're on drive-through RPG, all that stuff. And we will have basically these two products, right? Stillfleet, all the sci-fi stuff, and Blister Critters, which is amazing. And hopefully by the end of the year, you will be able to get both physically, in stores. But of course, with the Kickstarter, you can get some exclusives only through the Kickstarter. So that is the best place to back Blister Critters.
I kind of like exclusive stuff from Kickstarters. It's kind of a whole thing that I have. It's part of my personality at this point and part of the show. So I will be getting all of the stuff if I can. And same thing with you, Tony. Odd God Games. You put out Amu. We've already talked about this numerous times. Gorgeous, beautiful. Super excited for that to actually get to go through that. Definitely going to do that with Hunter. But where can people find that? Where can people find the other stuff you've already done as well?
Yeah. I'm at OddGob Games on both Instagram and X/Twitter. I post there as frequently as I can. I post like updates, and when I have to do the capitalism button, I post ads and promotional stuff there. Oddgobgames.itch.io. I have a handful of smaller games. I've dabbled in like print and play board game stuff, like Frogs with Shotguns. Is like a weird precursor to Blister Critters in a way. All illustrated, written, and done by me. So if you're looking for some other fun games that look like what I do but have a distinctly different vibe, you can find them there. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Seriously, thank you guys so much for coming on the show.
Yeah,
like I said, we both are so excited for this project. And hey, listen, we're still weeks away from Zine Quest, but at some point in the future, as Blister Critter gets funded and we start making more Blister Critters, if you guys want to come back and play an episode, we'd be super down for it. So just keep it in mind.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we'd love to have you guys back.
On the Stillfleet YouTube, which we're just everywhere at Stillfleets. If you go look this up, you can see the first published actual play we did with Jen De La Vega, Fun City, and Die RPG on replay. And that was super fun, and we kept it really tight. Tony GM, and it was really fun. It was like, honestly, cutting out the beginning end, it was like an hour and a half game, and it felt very narratively satisfying. And without spoilers, like, it's not combat-y, but there were a lot of roles. So it gives you a good sense of the grid system. It gives you a good sense of the world of the game, and Tony's amazing art, actually, because Tony also live drew stuff as we were describing it. So, I definitely recommend that. But maybe we could even put together, Tony, not to put you on the spot, something like that for these guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
No spots on everything. All for the spots. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to come back and produce, and if we can work it out, I'd love to, because sometimes different apps are weird about it, but I'd love to share my screen. I like to GM with a live drawing thing. It just feels really natural, and I think people get a lot out of it. So
we can make that happen. Technology does exist. We will do that. Absolutely. You just let us know the time after February, because Zine Quest is really loading us up, and we will 100% make the time for that. So if you're watching or listening now, definitely plan to see that in the future. But again, seriously, thank you guys so much for coming on. It's been fantastic talking to you. We could talk all day.
Same.
But both of us have to go to bed. So again, really appreciate it. Make sure you check out all their stuff, and back Blister Critters.
February 6th.
We'll see you guys
Thank you.
all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.